Chris Stock, welcome to People in Legal.
Thank you, David. It's great to be here.
Fantastic. Oh, goodness me. Now, I'm just thinking, we first met, was it back in 2000 and we talked about this the other day, weren't we? About 2013, I think it was.
Yeah.
I came into I think it was the offices of Clio to meet you and things, and we've actually had this sort of virtual relationship ever since then, I guess. Like, haven't seen each other in person. We actually hope to fix that situation up pretty soon when I'm over in the US.
Yeah, we definitely need to do it in person at some point. It's been way too long between drinks, as they say.
Definitely. Now, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong. You're the VP currently at Clio of drafting and integrations.
So yeah, I'm the VP of legal content and migrations,
Yep.
and that actually encompasses a few different portfolios. So it encompasses Clio Draft, which
Mm-hmm.
is document libraries and form automation.
Mm-hmm.
Encompasses calendar rules, which is court calendaring, which in the US is a very different beast than you would expect it to be in Australia. I also have e-filing under that portfolio. So if you kind of think about that portfolio and you think about the workflow or the engine room within a law firm, and you think about a document, every single legal matter generally starts with a document and ends with a document. And there are documents in between that get it to where it's going.
Mm-hmm.
And then as part of that process, there is those documents need to be filed somewhere. Now, in a property transaction, they're memorialized somewhere. Imagine trying to remember all this stuff in with memory. It wouldn't happen. So all these
Mm.
documents need to be memorialized, and that means that they need to be filed, so e-filed somewhere. And
Mm-hmm.
then, particularly in litigious circumstances, once they're filed somewhere for the first time, they then need to be calendared because they go through a court process that has a strict set of calendaring attached to it. And that really is the engine of a law firm. If you think about what a law firm does every day, what they do when they come to work, that is the absolute engine room that makes it tick. And then I also look after data migrations as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you've actually had a very, very long background in the legal technology space. I guess you started off in a law firm.
I did. So it's a funny story about how I actually got into this career. When I was a child, I dreamt of being a lawyer. I grew up in a place for those that listen to your podcast from Melbourne would probably be familiar with Broadmeadows. And Broadmeadows was a very kind of working class community.
Mm-hmm.
And my parents, worked super hard, and well, I was very fortunate to be able to send to a private Catholic school. It was not easy for them to do that, and I was very lucky to have had that. Um, as I grew up, I decided I definitely wanted to be a lawyer, and then I got to do my VCE HSC, and kind of messed around a bit. Like I was never a person to do studying, so I didn't do
Mm-hmm.
any studying, and my enter was kind of just off getting into law, but it was good enough to get me into a Bachelor of Science. So I went to Monash University and started a Bachelor of Science, and I hated it. Like it was the worst. So yeah, I did that for a few months, and I missed the cutoff on Hex by one day.
Oh,
So
goodness
I
me.
got three Hex for that for that semester. But I decided, you know what, I'm going to defer this. I'm going to go and work in a law firm
Mm-hmm.
and decide whether that's what I want to do and not come back unless I know that for sure, because I don't want to waste another, 3, 4 months of my life. So I found a job as a junior in a law firm in St. Albans,
Mm-hmm.
which is, another very strong, working class suburb in Melbourne, and started there as a junior. And then I worked in a number of roles along the way. So I was a conveyancer
Mm-hmm.
and I did home loan consulting.
Oh, wow.
Over the course of 7 years, I got to the point where I'd worked in solo and small law firms. I'd worked in a mid-sized law firm. I was running a department in a mid-sized law firm. I had worked in a government-owned legal department. And I thought, you know what? I don't really like doing this anymore. And if I want to keep doing it and actually make money, I actually need to go and get a law degree. And the reality is
Mm.
I understood conveyancing quite well at this point in time, but I didn't love it. But I didn't want to lose the experience that I'd earned, but I also loved law firms. And one of the strange things about it was that this was in 2001. So I was 18 when I started working in law firms. And because I was, in quotations, the young guy, that meant I was the IT guy. And back then, I think it might have even been Alta Vista and Excite, but I'll say Google search for simplicity's sake was most people probably don't even remember Excite and Alta Vista was my best friend. Like I was fixing computers just by running Google searches. And that led me to implementing a lot of practice management software in the businesses that I went to. So one day I'd kind of had enough in the role that I was in, and I turned up to work and I was, a bit younger and a bit less responsible. So I was wearing like this half wrinkled shirt and, this suit that had two buttons hanging off it. And I hadn't shaved my head for the day. And I got into the office and I decided I resigned at 9 o'clock in the morning. And I had a job interview after applying immediately after resigning. I should have done it before, but I did it after. I had a job interview like an hour later, and I'm like, oh no, I got to go buy a new suit. I got to buy an iron shirt. Like, and the ladies in the office that I was working with, they were fantastic. Like, one of them had like a steam iron, and they steam ironed my shirt for me, and the other one's
Ah.
put a button back on my suit jacket, and the other one's polishing my shoes for me. And they got me looking pretty good for the interview. So I went into the interview, and I had a new job in legal tech by 5 p.m. that night. And
Goodness.
I've never looked back from there. It's been a wild ride, and
Hmm.
I wouldn't change it for the world. I love law firms. I love tech. So I get up every day and I am able to do what I love.
I mean, what an amazing career journey. And I guess from that first position in legal tech, I guess tell us about that sort of journey. Where did you start there, and how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah. So my career commenced at Leap Legal Software in
Hmm.
Australia. And, I spent 15 years there.
Hmm.
And during that time, I actually started as a training and implementation manager. My role was to go and install the software and train people how to use it. And over the years, I worked my way up and worked in a number of different positions. I then became the state manager for that role. From there, I was asked to move to New South Wales because it was a much bigger market.
Hmm.
So, because I was previously, as I mentioned, in Victoria. So
Hmm.
I went there, and then I had some things added to my portfolio. So I started managing the National Partner Program, bookkeeping and accounting programs, and then I became the national manager of the consulting department. And then I became product manager at the point that cloud software was due for release, back in 2012, 2013. And then I was very fortunate in that I was able to expand the business internationally into the UK. And then from the UK, I expanded the business into the US. And then I was able to move to the PC Law Time Matters joint venture, which was a joint venture with LexisNexis. And I
Hmm.
ran that. And then I chaired a group of companies that incorporated Wealth Counsel and Elder Counsel, which are two very successful estate planning products in the United States. And then from there, 15 years in one place. I'd been running several businesses for a long time.
Hmm.
I decided that I wanted to go and spend some time on a nonprofit that I was pretty close to my heart. And that nonprofit's called a Second You Foundation.
Okay.
The Second You Foundation is a re-entry program. And, in the United States, something I didn't quite understand until I got here
Hmm.
was the disparity that we see in the justice system on TV is magnified 1,000 times when you are actually here.
Goodness.
I got a real passion for re-entry because, my view has long been second chances matter. And
Yep.
if you're going to give somebody a second chance by releasing them, then they need a true second chance. They shouldn't get a
Mm.
life sentence if they
Mm.
weren't given a life sentence.
Mm.
And, I really wanted to dedicate some time to that. So I became the chairperson of the Second You Foundation and started
Wow.
working with my good friend Hector Guadalupe, who was the founder of the foundation. And we still do a lot together today. And at that time, I also spun off a business that was focused on offshoring support staff for law firms in the United States.
Hmm.
And, as I was doing that, I started to get the itchy tech feed again. I was like, oh, I want to get back into legal tech. Like I was seeing LinkedIn posts, I was seeing LinkedIn posts from Clio, and I'm like, oh, I'd really love to get back into tech. So I went to ABA Tech Show in 2023, and I bumped into Jack Newton, who is Clio's founder. And we got talking, and we then met a couple of weeks later in New York. And then I decided, right now I still got a few things that I need to do in life, but let's have a chat again, in September later this year. So around September, October, Jack and I got together and we spoke about what it could look like having me at Clio. I was introduced to the chief operating officer of Clio, Ronnie Garayan, who has just an amazing background.
Mm,
Um,
he does.
he's been at so many big companies and been so successful in those big companies. And having met Ronnie and Jack, I sat there and I thought, I've kind of been to what I thought was the pinnacle of legal tech, but was it? And I sat there thinking, I don't know everything.
Mm,
And to be satisfied, I need to work with and for people who I can continue to learn deeply from.
mm,
And after meeting Jack and Ronnie, I knew that that was absolutely possible. So we decided that I'd come on an advisory basis to kind of feel each other out. And what happened was I went to CleoCon as part of Shift 6 OS, which was the offshoring business, and this was in October. And Ronnie and I had been talking, and we'd come to a bit of an agreement, and I could not believe just how exciting CleoCon was. I'll tell you now, if you ever want someone to sign an employment contract,
mm.
take them to your biggest event. And all I can see is that, because the second I saw CleoCon, I was like, I have to work here. Like this is just amazing. Seeing that the excitement that the customers had to be at a conference all about legal tech,
Mm,
watching them sit there and test new features live with, just pure joy outside of the office. And I could be wrong. There could be been slightly more or slightly less, but I think there was about 3,000 people there. There was a contingent globally that were online from Australia and the UK and other countries. And I just said, yeah, where's that DocuSign? And I got back to my hotel room after Jack Newton's keynote. So like super hyped, and I was like signing, e-signing this document. So
fantastic.
I was at Clio as an advisor 2 weeks after that, and
Hmm.
I've worked with them as an advisor until recently, where in May I was appointed, as we mentioned, the VP of Legal Content and Data Migrations. So
Hmm.
kind of a really long explanation of my career path, but I've been very, very fortunate to have been someone who has been able to climb the corporate ladder without a college degree, to be honest. Like, sometimes there's a stigma associated with that. I've actually always found it to be a little bit disarming and actually a benefit to my
Mm.
career. And, I've sat on boards and I've been the CEO, and I'm so excited to still be able to work with some people that I am going to continue to learn for a long time to come.
Yeah, they're amazing guys. I actually met them in person when they came to Australia last year. We had a great lunch and talked about the journey of Clio and what they're looking to do as well. So yeah, fantastic guys, and I could understand how you'd be inspired. Um, but no, that's what an amazing journey, Chris. You've done some. You've definitely seen the world through legal tech. You've done different territories: Australia, the UK, US. What a journey! I mean, not many people get to do that kind of thing.
I'm so fortunate. I said to someone once, so I think the most exciting part of all of this for me is that I achieved two things that as a child, I kind of said dreamily that I wanted to do. And they might sound strange, but I grew up with the American culture.
Hmm.
So I watched Seinfeld. I loved the NBA. It was the 90s. Like the US was raging in Australia in the 90s. Like all kids loved all things US.
Mm,
And I used to say, I want to move to New York and I want to be an American citizen. And I dreamed of, I had vivid dreams. I still remember them when I must have been 10 years old,
mm,
maybe even younger, of the Statue of Liberty. And I'd wake up disappointed that I had never been to New York.
mm.
I had the good fortune of being able to live in Sydney, London, and New York in the space of 18 months. But when I was
Wow.
in London, I didn't know that I was about to move to New York. So for New Year's that year, that would have been New Year's 2014, becoming 2015. I said, you know what, I'm going to go to New York for New Year's from London because I'm only a few hours away. I don't know when I'm going to get to go there again.
Goodness.
And little did I know that in 3 months' time, I was going to be asked to move to New York. And so I was able to achieve that, and I became a US citizen February last year. So I am now a dual national, and I've been able to live life dreams through legal tech. That is true.
Yeah, I mean, definitely well traveled. I mean, that's for sure. And you would have seen some of the differences in the markets as well between those key markets.
hmm Yeah, there are some real differences between the markets. Like the way I kind of look at it is that you have what I call the former Commonwealth countries. Now, I really need to be asked for forgiveness for this because I lump, I shouldn't say I lump, for simplicity's sake, it's a lot easier to say that than it is to say Australia, the UK, Ireland, Canada. Ireland is very similar to the Commonwealth countries, although I am acutely aware, so I don't want to be called up on this, that it is not part of the Commonwealth. But the Commonwealth countries all operate in a very similar way.
Hmm.
The United States is the equivalent of 50 countries. Every state does things their own way, and it actually goes right down to county level. Like you can have things done different in counties in some states, but not all states. So it's like going to, Sydney or New South Wales
Hmm.
and going to court in Penrith and then saying, we need this family law form that's specific to Penrith only.
Goodness.
And that is how different the US market is. And it certainly was a learning experience when I first moved here. It's been so exciting because I can now interpret it back the other way.
Hmm.
Uh, there's so much there's so much learning to take place when you jump between markets. But when thinking about them, you have some real similarities across the Commonwealth markets, um, and some real differences in the US markets. And then you got kind of US and Canada, where Canada is much more Commonwealth-like, but they have things like, some terminology as US terminology, and they have trial attorneys like the US has trial attorneys. But it is, like I said, slightly hybrid, but largely you can apply most of the Commonwealth methodology to it.
Hmm.
Really interesting thing here. There are two things that are incredibly similar
Hmm.
in all of the jurisdictions that are Commonwealth countries. You have Torrens title,
Hmm.
which Australians would be familiar with in legal, and you have trust accounting.
Hmm.
So those two things are very, very similar across those Commonwealth countries. And funnily, look, this could be an urban legend, but I have done reading on it and I understand it is true. Look, I know for sure Torrens came via Australia. And my understanding is that trust accounting actually the trust accounting regulations are very, very similar, largely because of Australia. And what I actually found is when I examined Canada, that the Australian trust accounting regulations, well, the
Hmm.
New South Wales, I will say. I know that they're national now. When I was doing conveyancing, they weren't, but I know they're national now. But the New South Wales provides certification. New South Wales and Alberta Law Society, which is kind of like the gold standard equivalent for certification in Canada. Um, you could almost overlay their rules. Like they were so similar, it was unbelievable.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, on conveyancing, this is one of the really interesting things I've discovered. So in the United States, conveyancing is they call it real estate, but when you go to law school, I was told this by a New York lawyer when I was explaining what I did in Australia in my first 3 months here.
Hmm.
And I was explaining, how conveyancing worked. And they said, well, let me tell you something, Chris. We learn conveyancing in law school here. And yes, we call it real estate, but any lawyer you talk to will know what a conveyance of property is. And then I started meeting a few New Yorkers and trying to understand why there was no Torrens titling. And what it is it's all very much insurance based. So
Mm.
have what we would call, when I was doing conveyancing Melbourne, old law, general law title chains that are stored at, generally county registrars. And they've never gone to Torrens because there's been this entire title insurance industry built around insuring these titles.
Wow.
Whereas the feasibility and government-backed titles in the Commonwealth countries, you don't have that sort of structure in the United States. And there have been a couple of moves to move to Torrens. One was in the late 90s in New York,
Hmm.
and that was absolutely kiboshed, largely driven by the fact that you would have lost an entire industry of jobs. But there is
Wow.
Torrens in Massachusetts where there's a property dispute and it needs to be settled in a planning court. They will register it then. So again, differences between jurisdictions are unbelievable.
I mean, having that skill set, it's amazing. I mean, I think, and I guess, I mean, being able to actually offer that up to Cleo, I mean, having a global perspective on things, and particularly sort of useful, in your understanding of the Australian market as well.
That's right. Look, Clio's a true global company, and we have actual users in, at last count, I think it was more than 50 countries around the world.
Mm.
It's an outstanding spread of customers, but we do have um, presences in, our head office is in Canada. We
Hmm.
actually have offices in Vancouver, Calgary, and Vancouver and Toronto.
Hmm.
We have staff spread throughout the United States. We also have an office in Dublin, and we have staff in Sydney. We also actually have staff in the UK as well. So it's a true global operation, and I'm sure that the Australian market's seen that Clio is available in Australia.
Mm.
It is really I spend a lot of time examining providers globally, and I'm saying this in complete honesty. Clio really is the first serious browser-based product to hit the Australian shores. Now, I know there have been other startups, but Clio is a mature business that has been doing browser technology available from anywhere, and they were one of the first. I
Hmm.
remember looking at them in, Clio was found. And I say them. I've only been here, 3 weeks now, so I should say. I remember looking at I remember looking at us. It was around about 2012, and just
Mm.
thinking, wow, you know, we've just taken legal tech to the browser.
Mm.
And only just imagine how far it's come since then. I mean, Clio was founded in 2008, so it is very much an enduring business.
Mm. Mm. No, they're doing really well. Um, Chris, I want to ask you some questions about you and your style and I guess some of the things you've come across in your career. I think some of our listeners would be really interested in those insights because you've done incredibly well. As a senior leader, how do you prioritize and manage your time effectively?
I trust my team. I think that you can really manage your time effectively when you don't micromanage people. So I think there's really some kind of top level strategic thought around it where I always say it's about trust, empowering people, and listening to people. And if you can trust people and then empower them to make decisions, and then listen to them when they're seeking guidance or they're communicating the results, I think you can be really effective in managing your own time because it leaves you time to do the things that you should be doing. People that don't do that do things that their team should be doing. And I think the other thing you should always do is have people that are prepared to disagree with you when you're doing that, and you should be open to listening to that disagreement. It allows you to be so
Absolutely.
much more. Dale Carnegie said in How to Win Friends, if two people always agree on something, then there's no need for one of them. I'm paraphrasing, but it was along those. If people always agree on something, then there's no need for one of them.
Yep.
I would say kind of there's things that I've learned over the years at a tactical level, and one of them is rhythms. Having business rhythms, having team rhythms,
Hmm.
making them effective. I spent a lot of time reading Jim Collins and Vern Harnish and Mastering the Rockefeller Habits, and they spoke a lot about rhythms. And rhythms are life changing. If you can be effective and have a weekly team meeting that unpacks everything it needs to unpack within an hour, and then have, depending on how big the business is, daily stand-ups with teams, but at least weekly one-on-ones with your direct reports. And in those one-on-ones, I like to call them impact meetings. And the idea with those one-on-ones, and this was very useful, actually, it's probably more useful now in the virtual world, where you have things like Slack and you have things like Teams, where you're very, very accessible. This theory or thought around impact meetings came from what they call got a minute meetings. And well, my memory might escape me. I think that might have come from Chet Holmes, the Ultimate Sales Machine. Spoke
Wow.
about spoke about got a minute meetings, and he said, no meeting is a minute. Every got a minute meeting
Hmm.
takes up half an hour to an hour, and got a minute normally means it's not urgent. So if you can actually store up all those got a minute meetings for a 1 hour impact meeting every week,
Hmm.
everybody is better off and more efficient and has more time because of it, because they are then treated very methodically and thought through articulately and carefully. Because got a minute is generally a chit chat that's not deliberate. So I
Yeah.
think they are kind of the top level and tactical things that I do to manage my time and to make myself more efficient. Probably at the very minute level, is I used to be terrible with emails. I used to have massive amounts of emails in my inbox, and I stopped that in 2009. And I moved to Touch It once, and the way I managed that was by moving it. If there was something that I had touched and I actually couldn't deal with it there and then, I moved
Hmm.
it to calendar, because in Outlook all you have to do is drag and drop an email to the calendar and you can diarize it for later. And I started doing that, and it was life changing. Like, I
Wow.
probably wouldn't have been able. In fact, if I think about one moment that kind of changed everything, it was changing how I managed my emails. It reduced my stress levels. It allowed me to focus on things that needed focus. And that may very well have been a sliding door moment for me. My career may not have taken off if I had have kept being lazy with emails.
I mean, you've got the other sort of feeds as well, like social media feeds and your LinkedIn feeds and WhatsApp feeds and other sort of Slack feeds. And I mean, it's become more complex to manage communication.
Yeah, social media is it's an interesting it's got so many positives and so many negatives. It's I think about it, and social media for me, I didn't grow up with social media. Social media for me, I was on Facebook in 2008, an early adopter, like, a lot of people out there. And then I kind of started getting old, you had Instagram come out and I wasn't on Instagram. And then I was late to the party on Instagram, apparently. I got on Instagram when TikTok was cool, and I stopped at Instagram. Like, my social media is narrowed down to LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Uh, because I like to keep myself, up to date with the community and the professionals out there. I
Yep.
think it's very, very good. It's a very, very good tool.
It
I
is.
think that's the thing. That is a strong tool. Um, I kind of leave the other social media stuff to the marketing experts.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, it's just there's specialists in those sort of areas that do a really good job. But I think LinkedIn is a really key sort of, and I find that a lot of the daily communication myself is through LinkedIn, with different sort of folks in the marketplace versus email.
You and I connect. You and I chat on LinkedIn sometimes, like
We
in text
do,
message.
we do.
Yeah, and it's helpful. Like I think that I get people reach out to me all the time on LinkedIn that I'm really pleased that they've contacted me. But if we didn't have LinkedIn, they'd be hunting down an email address or calling through in the olden days a switchboard to try and get to you, and you probably wouldn't take their call because you thought it would be a marketing call.
Mm.
So LinkedIn from a professional capacity, you and I certainly make the most of it to keep in
Oh,
contact
definitely.
with other and many of the other contacts that we have.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it also as well gives the communication context, because if I introduce you to somebody or you introduce me to somebody else and things, you can sort of see their background and what they've come from and things. Whereas an email kind of like it's a bit of it's a faceless thing. You've got to do all the work in explaining the context of the email and things as well. So I think the background that you get from LinkedIn as well is very, very useful. Um,
Mhm.
I mean, I guess it's I mean, you've got some very good techniques, Chris, in managing, I guess, in managing as a senior leader. I guess what are the key challenges you would have faced along the way?
Um, I think that the key challenges largely came before. When I talk about key challenges that formed a foundation for how I decided to become the sort of manager that I am.
Mm,
Um, there is there have been times when I was developing my leadership style where I may have read things wrong. And I think there was one particular moment in my life that really changed things.
mm,
I thought I was a pretty good manager, but I was really very quite young and naive, and I was dealing with a personality conflict. And I thought that I was right, I thought that this person had to go, right, and I was convinced. And I went in and sat down with my manager and said, look, I need to deal with this. And they said, have you asked them what's wrong?
mm,
I thought, you know what? I haven't. So I sat down and I said, can I ask you, is everything okay? And it wasn't. And from that moment onwards, that shaped the listening aspect of my leadership style. So one of the challenges I had early on was that I didn't listen enough. And, for some people, you have to teach the ability to listen.
mm.
And for others, it is natural. I had to learn the ability to listen. That was a challenge for me. But that single moment
Mm.
was a real eye opener and changed the way that I decided to carry myself as an active listener, if you will.
I mean, how does somebody actually learn to listen better? I mean, I guess how did you learn to listen better?
I started writing down everything.
Mm,
I found that I to this day I still slip. Like these sorts of bad habits, you will always slip. I would interrupt prematurely because what would
mm.
happen is I get a thought in my head. And I think I've done this to you. I'm sure you can think of a million times I've done this to you. You'll be mid-sentence and I'm thinking about what you just said, and I just can't concentrate on what anything else until I get out what I've just my response to what you just said. So I write, and that allows me to write down what I want to say so that when I finish listening, firstly, I continue to listen. I don't get stuck.
Mm,
And then when I finished listening, it may be that what I'm about to ask about is going to be addressed anyway.
mm.
So I taught myself to listen by writing. Um, and that's why I take copious notes. It's to partly memorialize memories, but it's also partly to prevent to engage in active listening.
Yeah, great point. And I think my experience with a lot of sales folks is that they're just, they show up, they present, but there's not as much listening as could actually happen. They
Mhm.
could be better listeners. Some of the sales folks you see in the marketplace right now, it's a really key skill, and people love being listened to.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. It's what do they say? People. Some people just like the sound of their own voices. In fact, I think that it's much rarer to find a natural listener.
Mm,
Yeah, what did Carnegie say? Like the sweetest sound in any language is one's own voice, I think. As well, no, one's own name.
that's right.
Something like
Yeah.
that. I kind of
Yeah.
think of that when I think about, listening. People naturally want to talk, I find.
Mm.
And listening is a very different skill set. I think
And
it
I,
was it was called The Excellence Dividend. The Excellence Dividend, I think it was by Tom Roth, I think was the name of the author. And he speaks a lot about active listening. And that was actually where I really thought I need to fix this problem when I read that
mm,
book and started writing.
I'd love to get a list of the books that you've mentioned today, so I can actually sort of share those with the listeners as well. Because it
Absolutely.
sounds like there's some fantastic insights you've got, and you've adapted those insights into your own life and management styles and those sorts of things.
Mhm. Certainly, I can get that for you.
What do you think is the most important lesson you've learned in your career thus far?
That when managed well, impatience is actually more of a virtue than patience. The lesson is that being impatient is not necessarily a bad thing. It's how you express it, which can be a bad thing. And impatience helps drive bias to action.
Mm,
That anything that drives bias to action when approached properly is a very important learning. So I think I actually call it strategic impatience. I think that strategic impatience is an absolute game changer, and it's the quickest way to get things done.
hmm.
Um, it's not about being rude. It's not about being difficult. It's not about micromanaging. It's about creating a culture of bias to action. And, if you always want something to be acted upon, many view that as being impatient. I view it as getting results.
That's interesting, actually. Strategic impatience.
Strategic impatience. That's right. Yeah. The other thing I've also learned, and I think that it's really important, is that it's okay to have a little bit of an ego if you want to be successful in your career. But you need to check it at the door at the right times. There's kind of an endearing. Yeah, I've had some wonderful mentors in my life, and some of them have had what I would call an endearing arrogance,
Mm,
where it's not rude, it's not disrespectful, it's not what we would call in Australia up ourselves.
mm,
It's a serious confidence and a well-placed confidence.
mm.
I've always, when I was a child, I always thought that was bad. What I've learned as I've met many people in the business world is it seems to be a bit of an indicator of success. But where it causes failure is where it's not checked at the door.
Yeah.
And when people think that they no longer need others' opinions and start to believe their own hype. So I think if you're strategic about it, I've learned that it can be quite defining.
Mm.
Um, but you should never let it stop you from continuing to learn. And I think that that's the most important learning that I have in that regard. I think that check your ego at the door and make sure that you sit there and continue to learn. Nobody knows everything.
No, I totally agree, and I think you it's interesting because one of the things that I've sort of heard you mention a couple of times now is the value of mentors, having good mentors along the way,
Mhm.
and getting lessons from mentors and things. And I guess having those mentors and be able to sort of even check in with mentors on where you're at with things. And I think it's a valuable thing. And I guess that's maybe a mechanism as well to sort of check, you know, ego versus ability.
Mhm. It sure is. And I think you want to surround yourself in a place where your peers are mentors, or place
Interesting.
yourself in a place where you are surrounded by your peers who have an ability to mentor you. I was very lucky for a lot of my career that I had, Richard Hugo Hammond.
Yeah,
I had Richard Hugo Hammond, who was a defining influence on my life.
yeah,
Like I was able to
amazing
learn
guy.
so much from him. One of the kindest,
Mm,
but strongest leaders, I think, I'd ever met. And now what I've been able to find myself is a place where every person I speak to is effectively a mentor in one way, shape, or form. Because I did things the same way. I mean, we evolved, but very much the same way for 15 years.
mm,
Now I'm in an environment where I'm really learning from everybody around me about how things can be done differently. And what I really try to focus on every day are the things that they do differently. And because they do it differently, they do it better.
mm-hmm.
And because I'm every day sitting there saying, okay, how does this person do this differently from me and better than me? I'm learning every single day. So I think that, that is something that I found, really important is to people think of a mentor as someone that sits above you.
Mm,
You select the right environment and you surround yourself with the right people. You actually are mentored 24/7 by your peers.
incredible. Yeah, I think, and that's actually, I think for some of the folks that are starting off in their careers, I think, and I've had some discussions myself recently, and I sort of said you can't get everything from one person, one mentor. I mean, but I guess what you're saying is, well, I know what you're saying is take it to another level, which is really set yourself in an environment where you've got a, yeah, where you've got mentors as colleagues, you've got mentors, managers, colleagues. It's the whole environment is around that, the continuous learning and mentoring.
It is. And I think for those that are starting out that might not have the luxury of deciding who they surround themselves with, what I would say is I used to run a leadership course. And one of the exercises I did was I said, take the three most influential leaders in your life that you know and pick all of their best qualities.
Hmm.
Pick three. I would generally say there should only be 3 to 5 of these qualities. Right. So let's do three. Pick their three best qualities.
Hmm.
Think of all the stuff you don't like and
Hmm.
just discard and grab their three best qualities and embody those three best qualities. And I
Mm.
found that worked for me from the moment I started before I was a manager. I thought about, I had my first manager in legal tech was a guy named James Bible. And I think James Bible.
Yeah. No,
You
James,
feel him.
talking about, yeah, great guy.
Yeah, and he had some great qualities that I still exhibit to this day. Like he had actually was he'd been in the military and he managed a little bit like he was in the military. And at that point in time, I was young and I was like a fairly difficult employee. And the way he managed me was like when you send a naughty kid off to the military if you have military service in the country. And it changed everything. But what I learned was there was some real structured things that he did when managing. And I've continued to do all those sorts of things to this day. And that was where I started thinking deeply about doing that. But what I'd realized is that over the years, I'd actually been a basketball referee. And I'd refereed at the semi-pro level, and I'd gotten quite senior in refereeing. And the people that were mentors in the refereeing world were very senior. Names that spring to mind is that there was a lady named Lexi Latanzio who you start with as kind of when you're first getting onto the refereeing scene and you're just starting out. I don't know that she does it anymore. And then as you move up in the ranks, your mentor or advisor, as they're called, was a guy named Pat Crow. And then when you move into the senior ranks, you had a guy named Alan Garraway. And I have actually written to Alan and said to him, thank you for all of the things you taught me while I was a referee, because you learn conflict management. You learn not to be arrogant. You learn when to check the ego and when to have an ego. I learned that I always look angry, right? And it's because when I concentrate, I
Mm.
always look angry. And he picked on me for that and picked on me for that. And I still do it, but not as much because for years he said to me, "You got to get that out of your system." And God, as I actually get teased quite a bit about this in the workplace, is that I do refer back to my refereeing quite a bit. And it was actually one of the most personality defining experiences of my life. And that was where I started picking up people's traits and saying, I admire
Mm,
that, I admire that. Not a fan of that one, so I'm just going to ignore that one. So
mm.
that was when I first did it outside of the workplace. And then James Bible was really the first person I dealt with within the workplace.
Yeah, I mean, amazing how you've actually taken a whole bunch of these experiences from outside of life and actually been able to embed them, I guess, within, yeah, like the extra stuff you're doing, the refereeing and other things you've done, um, yeah, the not-for-profit, etc., and be able to embed those into and improve, I guess, the workplace and yeah, share those with folks you've come across in your career. Um,
I love it, David. But one of the most enjoyable parts of my job is helping others achieve their goals. I
mm,
always have a mantra that if someone says to me, if I say to them, what do you want to do? And they say, I want your job, that is absolute music to my ears because I can't wait to start training them on how they can obtain that one, when the time's right. It's one of my favorite things to do in the world is to help others achieve their goals. So yeah.
and you've got a lot of you've got a very lot of very loyal, you've got a very, you know, big bunch of followers and people that are very loyal and a lot of people's careers you shaped during the time you've been in legal tech as well, Chris. I mean, people speak great volumes about you.
Thank you. Look, I've been fortunate to have met a lot of good people, and I've enjoyed every minute of it. And if someone's been able to take something away from that, I'm pleased to hear that. I'm the lucky one here. I've been fortunate to meet some incredible people.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think as I say, that there's a lot of good feeling about you out there. Um, a quick question just to sort of, I guess, round up. Have you got a memorable sort of experience during your career or funny story you'd like to share with the audience about something that's happened that's kind of like stuck in your mind that's kind of shaped the way you are?
Do you want a funny story or you want something that's shaped the way I am?
Give us a funny story, I think.
I was traveling, so I hadn't been that long in the United States, and I was asked to speak at the Dutchess County Bar Association, which, for those that are familiar with the TV show Friends, is kind of up near Poughkeepsie. And we were driving there. I got out to get gas. So I say gas now, petrol for Australia. Um, and as I got back into the car, I felt a rip, and it was myself and Richard Hugo Hammond. So I was with the chairman of the company, and I was the CEO. And I was on my way, and I had an hour before I had to speak, and I had a complete rip right down the back of my pants that could not be covered. You could see flesh. So here I was driving around Poughkeepsie with the chairman of the company, trying to find a suit shop. I found a Men's Warehouse that were able to on the spot provide me with a pair of pants and very quick tailoring. It was the first time I'd ever worn a suit that was not matching with the jacket and the pants, but I survived the occasion. But it was one of the funniest now, but embarrassing experiences of my life, sitting with the chairman of the company, hopping into my car and having my pants tear from end to end with
Oh,
skin showing and all, and having to tie my jacket around my waist as I run to Men's Warehouse. But we survived, David. We survived.
I think what that does is that's a moment of resilience, Chris. That's about resilience and actually being resourceful, resilient, and just dealing with stuff. I mean, life happens, doesn't it? Really, and I think what it means, you get along with it and just figure out solutions.
That's right. That's right. There's always a solution to a problem. I've had my luggage lost on the way to important meetings. Actually, it happened to me 4 weeks ago. I was due to meet people in Vancouver at Clio for the first time. My luggage went missing. My suit was in there. Everything was in there. I arrived at midnight. Meetings were at 9 o'clock the next day. I managed to find that Uber Eats would go into a 24-hour Walmart and came back with at least something I could wear. So no matter what happens in life, There's a resilience aspect where if you love solving problems, you'll solve them.
I'm just actually I've got a scary vision in my mind of some of the stuff you might have bought in the Walmart. It wasn't any sort of touristy type stuff, was it? Or like, welcome to type t-shirts.
No, but I asked for the blandest things I could possibly have. And three different size belts so that if they got me the wrong size pants, there was hope.
Chris, honestly, it's always wonderful chatting with you. It's amazing. I always walk away learning new things. I've massive thanks. You've been a massive supporter over the businesses we've been working with over the years. I know that Cleo are very lucky to have you in the fold and working with them. And I look forward to doing some other podcasts with you as well. So I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, David. Thank you for having me on the show, and thank you for what you do within the legal tech community as well. I'm sure you hear the same thing that you just said about me. You have many great admirers in the legal tech community. You've built an incredible list of contacts and friends, and it says a lot about your wonderful character. So thank you for what you do in legal tech. It's greatly appreciated by all of us in the industry.
Thanks, Chris. I'm actually blushing, but you're very kind. Wonderful as always chatting, and we'll do a write up about some of the books you've recommended as well, and also we'll get a write up for you about as well, and some of the things you're working on right now. Thank you again,
Absolutely.
Chris.
Thanks, David.
Perfect.
Let me just let